Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette and our series on bespoke shoes, where we show you how a pair of shoes is made by hand from start to finish by one shoemaker. Today's episode number 4 is all about the trial shoe. We talk about how it's made, why it's made, and how different shoemakers approach this topic. If you're joining in the middle of a story, please check out our playlist so you can see the full series. So what do I mean by trial shoe? No, it's not a shoe for Perry Mason for the courtroom, but it's a rough mock-up of what the final product will look like once the last is done.
That has nothing to do with this trial.
In short, it's a practice run for the final shoe. Frankly, every shoemaker has a different process. Some make several trial shoes. Others make just one, maybe in a higher quality. And other shoemakers skip a trial shoe altogether. At the end of the day, all approaches lead to the same goals. For the customer, that means to get a perfect fit. And for the shoemaker, it means that they don't have to redo the shoe at the end of the process and that they save as much cost as they can. On that note, it's really important to understand that a trial shoe doesn't automatically guarantee a better fit. In fact, I remember talking to Bernhard Rötzl once, and he told me that his best fitting shoe came from a shoemaker who didn't do a trial shoe, and the first pair fit better than other shoes where he had multiple trial shoes done. Now, no shoemaker is perfect, and while a shoe may be a perfect fit for a customer the first time around, it may not be for the second or third customer. In today's video, you'll see how Amara Hark-Weber, a bespoke shoemaker from St. Paul, makes her trial shoe and what her approach is. In fact, she used more than one pair of trial shoes for me just to make sure to get out all the kinks for the final product. All rise, or in the courtroom, let's talk about trial shoes. So first up, what exactly is a trial shoe? Despite all the best efforts and measurements, it is rare that a bespoke shoemaker can translate those measurements into the perfect last right away. Now, a trial shoe is made on the same last the final shoe will be made on, with the goal to understand imperfections, issues, especially in terms of fit. Why do shoemakers use trial shoes? Well, the earlier you find issues and correct them, the less expensive it is overall and the less effort and time it takes to fix. Every shoemaker has a different approach to trial shoes. And as Amara puts it, ask 10 shoemakers about their approaches to trial shoes and you'll get 15 answers. Some shoemakers make a nearly finished shoe that you can actually walk around in for an entire day, and then you can see where it hurts, where it's maybe really good, or what the imperfections are that need to be changed. Some shoemakers use inexpensive leathers, scrap leathers, or materials because they just care about the fit. Others swear by using the same leather that they will use for the final shoe so the customer can really experience what the final product will feel like. In any case, a trial shoe will always increase the overall cost of a shoe, but it may protect the shoemaker from having to redo the shoe again because it doesn't fit or isn't to the customer's liking at the very end of the process. Some shoemakers don't make trial shoes at all because they say, well, 90% of the time I have to redo the shoe anyways, so I'll just take my chances and save time and money with the trial shoes in the first place. After all, there are a few tweaks here and there that a shoemaker can do at the very end of the process to improve the fit. But of course, if there are major issues, it requires a full redo. Amara Hark-Weber falls somewhere in the middle. She does a trial shoe, in fact, multiple trial shoes if necessary, but she uses very cheap leathers. She doesn't have a full heel block, so you can really just stand in it, wobble around and sit, but not take the shoe and walk around in it for hours on end. The leather she uses is also one single layer. She doesn't have a lining, so it's quite a bit different than the final product. She also uses a very cheap insole and no outer sole. For Amara, a trial shoe is just about fit and comfort. As she put it,
I call them fast and uglies because they're fast and they're ugly.
She doesn't want to spend extra time on making it look nice or having all those layers because it just drives up cost. Of course, as a customer, you may be horrified to see this shoe for the very first time, and you may question yourself, what have I gotten into here? Don't be worried, your shoemaker may just use it to determine that the last itself has the right shape. So how is a trial shoe made? First of all, it starts with double checking the last. For Amara, that's exactly the first step, right? Double checking the last. I mean, just compare the original raw last and the one we have now. Clearly, you can see a difference here. Always keep in mind, the final shoe will look different because the additional layers of leather on top will soften the harder corners and edges. For example, Amara told me that in the final shoe, the ball will appear wider and the waist will seem narrower. If you're unsure of the last design, maybe the toe shape or something that you want changed, don't be afraid to speak up. Now is the perfect time to do that. This is what this whole process is for. Also, approach it with an open mind. Listen to what the shoemaker has to say, because sometimes when you add the outsole and you stitch it, and the way you finish that has a huge impact on the overall look that might look different now on this very trial shoe. As Amara puts it,
So the last is really the shape of your foot, and then the look of the shoe itself is really defined by the leathers that we use and how we choose to use them.
of course, Amara double checks the pedograph to make sure it's fine, but ultimately she'll rely on my feedback and what I tell her and how it feels. Obviously, a tight fit, a good fit, or a loose fit are very subjective, and this trial shoe process helps Amara understand what it is that I want. Now I feel something and I can say yes or no. I can say, my little toe hurts a little bit. I want more space here. I want less space here. This is uncomfortable. The heel feels too wide, and so forth. As she put it,
I don't totally know what you want your shoe to feel like.
That's right.
And so I'm going to do my best to talk to you about that and to use my experience to fit these to your feet.
in a second step, we'll have to make a pattern for the leather from the last. Obviously, a pattern is typically two-dimensional, the last is three-dimensional, so there's a problem. So in order to get a 2D pattern from a 3D last, Amara uses some stiff masking tape and glues it onto the last. You can see she does this very neatly, and then she crosses over so there are multiple layers. Once the last is completely covered in masking tape, it's cut apart and flattened so you have a 2D surface and you have all the curves and forms of the last reduced to that thing you can cut out on leather. As Amara put it,
So we're making a pattern. So we're basically to make a pattern for a shoe, we work off flat patterns. And so we have to go from round, which is the shape of the shoe, to flat, which is the pattern pieces. And then those pattern pieces get combined to go round again.
Amara uses mostly one layer of tape. Other shoemakers may use more. Sometimes she may use more. Each shoemaker has their own approach. While masking the last, Amara shared that she was once at a school where they spent hours on masking the last. She does it much more quickly. Once the last is masked, Amara removes excess tape with a knife. She also notes which part of the last conforms to the right shoe so nothing gets mixed up and the final result will actually fit onto the last. She then scores along the entire length so she can separate the tape from the last. Finally, the total of 4 sections are now applied to paper. It's not a flimsy paper, but it's also not too thick. It just helps to later cut the pattern from this paper masking tape mix. And voila, that's how you convert the shape of a 3D last into a 2D pattern. Now you may notice that the pattern actually has some excess around the edges. Now that's not a coincidence or faulty, but later on the material, mostly leather, will have been nailed in at the bottom of the shoe, so you need excess in those areas. And Amara of course knows that because she's done it many times before. This excess around the edges is sometimes also called lasting allowance. The masking tape goes to the feather line, and then you have additional material for the bottom of the shoe. Step 3. Now it's time to cut the patterns from the leather. Amara typically tries to use a neutral leather for a trial shoe because it's not about the style, but all about the fit. It's also easy to work with, and of course much less expensive than the final leather I chose for the shoe. Just imagine the price increase if you would make an alligator shoe and you would use the same leather for a trial shoe. That would simply be nuts. For calf leather, maybe you can still do that, but even there it's expensive if you use the good stuff. Basically, the shoemaker takes a skin or a hide, puts the patterns on them, and then traces around them and cuts them. After they're cut, once again, Amara compares the pattern to the cutouts just to make sure everything is proper. Then the pieces are brought to a sewing machine to assemble them. And no, it's not your good old sewing machine. It's a special sewing machine that has a post in the middle that makes it easier to sew things like shoes. Because I chose an Oxford model, Amara stamped some eyelets into the leather so we can put some temporary shoelaces in there so we get the real feel. Or something close to it. Obviously there's no tongue, for example. Now the leather upper is ready. Step number 5, it's time to assemble the trial shoe. First, a insole is tacked onto the last from the bottom. And Amara doesn't use a high-end leather. It's a material called Texon, which is like a fiberboard insole. When you buy inexpensive shoes, typically they use that kind of an insole in the shoe. The final shoes, of course, will have high-quality all-leather insole. Other shoemakers may use high-end leather, low-end leather, scrap leather, pressed leather. Again, different people have different preferences. Next up, Amara places the uppers onto the last to see how it fits overall. Yes, Amara wants the laces in there, but obviously these are just here to give us the appearance. We definitely have some nicer ones in our shop. Next up, Amara sprays the uppers. Why? Because wet leather is more malleable and it retains the shape better on a last. Amara also adds talcum powder to the last so it will later be easier to take the last out of the shoe. Now that the uppers are on the last and everything is prepared, Amara uses a tool called pincers to really pull on the leather from the bottom. Sometimes they're also called cobbler's pliers, and they combine the pincer with a hammer. So the shoemaker doesn't always have to grab different tools during that process. I wonder if her tools would have made a difference in tearing apart those elements. Nah, I don't think so. See those tags Amara is using to secure the uppers to the bottom of the last? They're made from old pegging awl heads. Pegging awls are used to make the pegs for the holes in a wood. That's typically a tradition to attach an outer sole to a shoe. It's popular in Austria, Hungary, Romania, and other parts of Eastern Europe. Sometimes you'll also see those at a hand-welted shoe where the waist is reinforced with wooden pegs. Instead of using tacks, a Swedish shoemaker gave Amara these awl heads, which work really well and do the job because they're made of hardened steel. I'm sure your shoemaker may have tools that are somewhat misappropriated or items that just help their workflow. On top of that, I'm sure they'll have a few stories to share. As you can see, Amara is also hammering the uppers to smooth it out and to get it that shape of that last. Someone once asked Amara how to stop hitting your fingers when hammering. Amara only found one solution.
I was like, you just have to lose nerve endings in your fingers. That's the only way to fix it. The only way to do that is to hit it a lot of times.
Don't worry, those tags won't remain in place. They're just there to help the leather remember the shape of the last, and then eventually they're taken out and everything is glued down to that insole. So I can step inside of it and see how it fits. Of course, whenever Amara glues stuff, it goes into the fume hood so she doesn't inhale all these toxic fumes. And there's reapplying of glue in areas that have more strain, more hammering, and there's a back and forth, as you can see. It's really important that you don't have any obvious wrinkles in there. That's why you see her hammering a lot, so everything is smooth. And finally, Amara's trial shoes are done. Again, keep in mind, there's no outsole on there. Other shoemakers may glue one on. There's no real heel. Other shoemakers may do that. But there's no one recipe. But hey, Amara was right. It was a fast process, but I look really ugly.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
I'm sure you've actually seen some bespoke shoes with that center seam. I'm just glad that my final bespoke shoes won't look like that. Now it's time to put on a trial shoe and see what the fit of the last is. Mara takes notes of areas that are obviously too loose or too tight, and she actually draws onto the leather so she knows where she has to make changes on the last. Now the shoe is still in the last, and I want to actually test it so we can figure out the imperfections and where we have to improve things. In order to do that, we have to pull out the last from the shoe. After all, we have to get the last out of the way if I get to try these on. You may wonder, how do you get that last out? Unlike a shoe tree, there are no coils in there and there's no flexibility. It's also not a lasted shoe tree with a, what do you call it? The door, a hinge. It's also not a lasted shoe tree with a hinge. Now Mara has 2-piece and 3-piece lasts that she holds in place with a screw and assembles and disassembles. By doing that, you create less strain on the leather shoe when you pull the last out of it. When you make a riding boot, for example, you'll have a lot more parts. Because obviously, you can't just pull one big riding boot last out of the boot without destroying it. Once the last is unscrewed, she has a special tool that's like a hook with stirrups that helps her to pull that last out of the shoe. Amara compares removing the last from a shoe to opening a bottle of wine or champagne. Ideally, it should be smooth and elegant, but in reality, it's not always like that. It's not always graceful and seamless, but actually hard work. Now, your shoemaker may have different lasts. Maybe they don't use screws, so that process will differ. Once that was out, I was finally able to put my foot in and see how it really fit. Now, for me, it was an interesting experience because it felt quite soft overall. That was because the leather was soft and there was no lining. Therefore, I really had to focus where the leather touched my foot and if I liked it feeling or not. Overall, I would have preferred to have a trial shoe I could walk around, but at the end of the day, I trust the shoemaker and their process. I'm not going to tell them what to do. From the get-go, I thought the shoes were a pretty good fit, almost like they were made for me. But then I stood a little longer and I sat down and I tried to really pinpoint the issues. And of course, there were some. Ultimately, we wanted to test all points of contact. Especially shoemakers have trial shoes that very much look like a final shoe. It may be really painful to watch them cut your shoe apart, maybe in a toe box, just to see if the toes touch the sides or if everything is right in terms of the last. Sometimes they also cut open the sides where your little pinky touches the leather, or your big toe. They may cut open the heel just to see if everything is in order. Amara prefers not to cut it open. She touches the foot through the leather and talks to you to figure out where she has to make changes to the last. There was definitely some looseness in the throat area. Amara asked how my small toes felt and if I could move them if I had too much air or too little. And she just wanted to get an idea of how it felt for me. I could feel some contact, but just standing and sitting there, of course, it wasn't uncomfortable. Now, with her experience, she knows that this might become abrasive or an issue down the line, so she took note of that. I also proactively shared with her what I felt, because obviously one shoe felt different than the other, and I wanted them to feel the same. I also felt some looseness in the left heel, which I didn't want, and a ridge of leather near the big toe of my left foot. Actually, it was caused by pulling from somewhere else on the shoe. I also felt some tightness along the flank of the outer waist. Of course, I like the look of a tight waist, so I talked to Mara to see how tight of a waist we can get without it feeling constricting. She listened to me, and in the end, she made some adjustments in that area, maybe just 1 millimeter, which is really not that much. It's 1/25th of an inch. After all, small changes can make a big difference. The toe box area had a tight fit, and originally I specified I wanted that, but realistically over the course of the day, or if I'm in a hotter climate with my toes swelling, the toe box probably would have been too tight and uncomfortable. Because she felt the fit of the joint was good, she decided to make the toe box bigger. She also double-checked the overall length of the shoe And as the customer, it can be hard to fully understand everything that goes on and what impact changes in the last will have down the line. Again, it really helps to trust your shoemaker here and just share what you feel and experience. It's important to be honest and sometimes maybe a little blunt. Don't be afraid to share issues you have because they will be there later. So if there's something that doesn't feel right, just say so and they're happy to accommodate it. You're not saying that I did a bad job. It's just part of the process, and you also have to share the things you feel or the things you wonder about or question. So in my case, there were enough changes that Amara felt a second trial shoe was in order. For the second trial shoe, I left Amara to make all the adjustments. When I returned, she had changed things on the last and made a new trial shoe that was still on the last. She told me that she brought in the heel, raised the joint, and widened the toe box. Once again, she removed the shoes with the screws, pulled the last out, and I tried them on, and immediately they felt better than the first time around. When I tried on these shoes, it was summer outside and it was really hot and humid. So my feet were swollen to different degrees at different points in time. So that's something you also have to keep in mind. In the morning, typically, your feet are less swollen than if you sit all day in a hot, humid environment. After all, your shoes should always fit you, no matter the time of day or the surrounding conditions. I still felt some pressure on the little toe, and she marked it. She also marked pressure points at my right foot, my right direction. She felt the heel curve and checked and was satisfied. While looking at the waist, I told Amara that ideally I wanted my waist tighter. She indicated that bringing the shoe near the top would also help at the bottom. We also noticed that the throat was still loose aesthetically, which wasn't very pleasing. But she told me that the final shoe would be higher than the trial shoe, so I trusted her. Of course, and then it was time again for Amara to do some changes. She applied leather additions to the last. She glued leather into place. Then she applied, hammered, and glued more leather to the last. She trimmed the leather, and she finished the last on a finishing machine. So because even the second trial shoe wasn't perfect, she wanted to do a third trial shoe. But in order to save time, she reused the same uppers. The changes weren't dramatic and drastic, so the overall impact of reusing the uppers wasn't that big, and I was fine with it. Of course, the leather was re-stretched in between, re-wetted, re-watered, and leather has this ability to really remember the shape once it's wetted. It's really quite remarkable. Of course, putting in a third trial shoe was just the same as in the first and the second. Overall, the shoe was really nice now, it felt really good, and the only thing I wanted to change was a bit of looseness in the heel, but Amara told me in the final shoe it would be different and tighter. Why? Because it would have a heel counter and that would help with it. So I took her word for it. To wrap it up, the most important part of the trial shoe process is for you to understand what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what hurts, and where there's maybe too much room or too little room. The shoemaker will, of course, guide you with their particular questions, but they literally can't be in your shoes, so you have to proactively share what you experience and feel. Don't be afraid. They won't be offended. They really just want to get it right, because the last thing they want to do is having to remake the shoe once it's finalized.